Welcome to Planet Poet, Words in Space. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and I'm very happy to welcome poet, editor, and publisher Jared Daniel Fagen as my in-studio guest to discuss his upcoming collection, The Animal of Existence, and his literary press, Black Sun Lit. Hi, Jared.
Hi, Sharon. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure. And I'm going to read your bio. Jared Daniel Fagen is the author of The Animal of Existence, which is forthcoming from Black Square Editions in 2022. His prose poems and essays have appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, Lana Turner, Asymptote, Prelude, and Caesura, among other places. Currently residing in Arkville in the Catskills, he is the editor of Black Sun Lit, a PhD student in Comparative Literature at the CUNY Graduate Center, and an English instructor at the City College of New York. Welcome again, Jared, and we have so much to discuss, and we're going to start with a discussion of your authors that you are publishing, the most current publications of Black Sun Lit, starting with Katy Mongeau, and her book is called Apostasy. And would you start us off with reading a little bit from the book?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The difference between the black birds and the black flies was only the distance from my lazy eye. For all I knew, the world out there was rotten. Ungrateful, he reaches in and pries. I have been woman most wretched. The earth is damp and the tulip bulbs are rotting with me. I am cross and locking eyes with evil, learning how even a lamb may be wicked. Clover and coveting fire, the white one with a body left better off abandoned. I should have been stretched out in the wet field, waiting for the snake in the grass. Vicious and knowing little. Fever spreads the scent. I am persuaded by war. Instinct dictates my rhythm.
That's Jared Daniel Fagen reading from Apostasy by Katy Mongeau. And the book is a small, beautiful book, and as you read, and your pauses indicate that there are just a few lines on each page. It's very impactful that way. Could you tell us a little bit about Katy Mongeau?
Sure.
Thank you.
So Katy Mongeau is a writer from Jacksonville, Florida. She earned her MFA, I believe, in fiction at Brown University, and moved to New York, I think a little bit around the time Apostasy came out, which was right in the middle of COVID. And Apostasy is her first book. And I was introduced to Katy, through her work. We had both published poems in an issue, I think, of a now defunct journal, and I had reached out to her, sort of right away. And the poems that were included in the journal ended up in the collection Apostasy. And I learned sort of later she's a bit phantom. She's sort of here and then she's not. And I sort of love that also about her.
It's reflected in her poetry, perhaps.
Yes, I think so.
Could you tell us more about the title of the book, Apostasy, and how it echoes and reverberates through the book?
Apostasy, of course, has religious and spiritual connotations, right? The abandonment of one's faith. Also, I think, in a political context. But of course here I think we're talking more about the former. I think more presciently the book as an apostatic, renunciation is really felt through this persistence of punishment. Its timelessness, its persistence, its sort of harrowing echo throughout the book, and after that act of renunciation. And I did also, we were talking a little bit earlier, the importance of the strike-through in the title, and I guess we can't see this, or others can't see this here, but the title Apostasy, as well as the author's name, are crossed out. And I think this gesture marks and brings to the fore a sort of negative kind of dialectic, right, between self, past and present, self and other, and self and world.
Mm-hmm.
The self always sort of pitted against, caught in tension. Mm-hmm. The inflicted, the self-inflicted.
It's also it's like a sword through it. Also,
mm-hmm.
It's like the self cut in two, which is is a very I don't know if it's despairing, but very intense quality about the book, and thank you for that. And the second part of the book is called Hostia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a host. It's like a communion wafer, or it's a sacrifice. And
mm-hmm.
the book is her words in that second half really, to me, mean what the strike through in the title implies. And it's so interesting how just a line through a word can change it so completely. It's sort of a sign of something else.
Mm-hmm.
I want to read the comments on the back cover by Carol Masso, who's the author of Ava. And she says about Katy's work, at the center of speechlessness, Katy Mongeau attempts utterance recklessly, sentimentally, desperately, sometimes with erasure and cancellation, sometimes with embellishment, hanging on to the vestiges of violence, wreckage, and sensation, writing and unwriting, tending the wound at its core. And I like that, writing and unwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very, it has a lot of violence in it, implied violence, but the way the book is laid out, the way you laid it out as a publisher, I think, in conjunction with Katy, it has a peacefulness about it. There's a contemplative quality about it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of space on each page,
mm-hmm.
so it gives the reader a different feeling. Would you read from the second part, please?
Absolutely. Great. The fat stays on without a knife. I render me serrated for your accolade and no one else's. Into the room I stay fast, suspended. When you near the door, I pirouette from the ceiling's heavy hooks. There is an unsurpassable taste, salt to be cured, fastened to the rapture of a one-rope pulley me. The ceiling beams as I shake loose the plaster, lemon bleached for tender. Frolic, how I am remembered. The flora still sticky to my new courageous feet. Forgetful, like at the market. Soil becomes mud with spit, slipping past your teeth to me.
That's powerful. It's Jared Fagen reading from Katy Mongeau's Apostasy, and that's definitely as the speaker's body as sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's the line through the title that's very viscerally depicted.
And I love that, Sharon, and I'm so glad how you articulate that, like a sword.
Thank you.
And there's sort of a medieval quality,
yes.
I think, to this book as well. And, the tending the wound at its core, this isn't a negation as a sort of positive healing from some kind of trauma, right? Because there's trauma, I think, laced throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, with the strike through, the announcement of a scar, right, that doesn't go away,
mm-hmm.
right? Again, after the act of trauma, right, or the act of renunciation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really interesting.
Very. Throughout this is the beauty of the language. which belies the violence and the, what do you do with that beauty? That beauty is almost the saving quality of it. So you can never discount the beauty of the sound, right?
Yeah, you have to sort of temper the violence in some way, but not lose the violence, right?
No, but that idea of the human body as sacrifice, I was very struck by that. And
I think, and you said before, the host, right? And I think that always comes with its other, the parasite.
That's right.
So one's ecstasy is also one's pain. And with the wafer, there's, of course, consumption, right? Especially in the passage that, we just read. The salt, the tenderness. And so sacrifice, when is sacrifice too much, right? When does it become surfeit or excessive?
Or total.
Right, or absolute.
It's interesting you mentioned the word ecstasy, because to me it's like apostasy. It's the opposite of it, but it's so related.
Yeah, it sounds, the two sound very nice together.
And then the next poet that you have published, I wonder if you could introduce her and the upcoming launch of her book, I Am Writing You from Afar.
So I'll just read maybe her bio.
Okay.
Which is, I think, a poem in itself.
Yes.
Moyna Pam Dick, a.k.a. Lou Moyna Gregoire Pam Dick et al., is the author of Moira of Edges, Moira the Tart, This is the Fugitive, Metaphysical Licks, and Delinquent. Her novel graphic, I Am Writing You from Afar, belongs, with edges, to the In Progress Evasions trilogy, a triad that links spare art, fic spec, and pert, abstractive saints. Also an artist and philosopher, Dick lives in New York City, where she explores transient structures, veridical, temporal, sonic, spatial, etc., obsessive formalisms, haunted intertexts, cluster semantics, and the vulnerable, moody, tender urban sublime. Her slyly unruly, tone-shifting notations span the genre-gender spectral.
That's great. That is a very interesting bio. She calls the book a novel graphic instead of a graphic novel, but it twists it very nicely. I can tell that she's being very precise about what she does, although there's a tremendous ephemeral quality about what she is doing. And I Am Writing You from Afar. And you had mentioned to me, as I saw in the title, that the U is also struck out there, and that's very important to the book. If you want to, why don't we just read a little bit? If you would read from the beginning.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's impossible to know how to continue. A wall of lucite between myself and the others. Everything. Of glass? My point already blunted. Sharpness dissembled. When yellow. The ice cracks, and some of us go instantly deaf. I hear a constant ticking. Leaves ticking. Leaves of finitude's clock. What does hearing have to do with eternity? This cave that is a treehouse, using one eye for distance, one for nearness, yet the simultaneity untenable. Now each moment I must choose. The good distance versus the bad distance, the temporal or spatial distance. Here, the birds of prey, from elsewhere, threatening. We are the dead ones among the living, or the inverse. Vultures or falcons? To enter the emptiness, you must become emptiness. But how to evict all the warring? There's warring everywhere. Remove the brightness from the fantasy? Threat to turn to ice, then to dissolve. Spiritual alchemy, but the brightness a danger. a constant, insidious whirring, putting a hand over your mouth, arriving here to the sound of metal clattering, this steady motion, reverberation. Against that, a positing of stillness, or using your hand to peel away your mouth as superficial wound. Still, an exigency of breathing, the bad emptiness versus the good emptiness, the dead emptiness versus the God emptiness. Henri, how I wish that you would travel to Gile with us the way the story dictated. The taking of water, the demand to make the blackness be fawn.
That's Jared Fagen reading from Moyna Pam Dick's I Am Writing You From Afar. And the title echoes that of Henri Michaud, who she writes to in the book when she says, Dear Henri, is Henri Michaud, who wrote a poem called I Am Writing to You From a Far Off Country. And the poem it's an epistolary poem, or she's just writing to him, and a lot of his work, when I was reading his poetry translated by Richard Ellman, it makes you very uncomfortable. As Ellman said, to read Michaud is to be uncomfortable, and to read Pam Dick is to be uncomfortable also. But she puts the contrast, and I wanted to read well, let me just say that Pam Dick has epigraphs at the beginning of the book, and two of them are in French by Henri Michaud. And this is the first is it's from something called Postface, which is translated by Richard Seaberth. Self, all in caps, makes itself up out of everything. A shift of inflection within a phrase. Is this another self attempting to make its appearance? If the yes, all caps, is mine, is no, all caps, a second me. And would you talk about that in terms of what she's trying to do what she does in this writing, Jared?
Yeah, I think yes and no are sort of unsplit here. And the splitting, I think, is really important to the book. Mm-hmm. And, again, I think we should, as you bring up, Sharon, calling attention to the strike-through of the you. So yes and no, I think this is an epistolary address to Henri Michaud, but I think here the strike-through suggests a motion from this intimate apostrophe or address to Henri Michaud into something more abstract, solitary and distant. Mm-hmm. And this suits, I think, the progression of the book. There are also strike-throughs within the text as well. Mm-hmm. So the intertextual aspect is, of course, important, but we need to also consider this gesture of escape and how one escapes when the sort of agreement and disagreement of the yes and no, or the self, right, made up of everything. How is that possible, right?
How to identify it and disidentify from it.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of the Beckett, I can't go on, I must go on, in a way. You know.
And also Rimbaud's, I is another, right? Sometimes the poem can suggest that it comes from, someplace else or from afar and outside us, but also within us, right? And, that I, that is another, can also be the I, right? If that makes any sense. It can also be the self addressing the self, or readdressing the self.
Yes, and because the you, the cross out, the strike out of the you, implies that it's no longer you. It's to me, it's her.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
or the speaker.
Yeah,
I hesitate to call it her. To Pam Dick, because it's always, the speaker is always a little different in poem, or what would you call this, a long poem, or it's a novel?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of everything.
Yeah.
It's plurilingual. It's sort of a hybrid of narrative fragments, philosophical mysticism, art writing, the sort of spare, condensed poetic lines, sort of semi-aphoristic, I think. But I know that the presence or presentation of the novel, or the book, which is also a novel, but it's a novel graphic, right? So I think Pam is calling attention to the object, its malleability, a little bit of play, right, between the different genres. And it's an artist book, I think. And I think that's where the graphic element comes into play.
It's also a musician's book, because she has a character in there who she also addresses, Mortone, and I'm looking up Mortone, it's like, who is he? And then I see the reference, of course, in the beginning, there's an epigraph by Morton Feldman. And I said, that's Mortone. And that was quite wonderful, the way she just makes everything her own in this alchemic stew that she creates. And I think we have time for you to read a couple of passages, one to illustrate why it might be possible for her to continue, and then we can maybe hear a little Morton Feldman, and you can read some more against his music. It would be great.
Absolutely. It's about time and truth, then inevitability, about silence and language, or interior or private language, or mystical aphasia, like dripping off the corner of the chair into an idiolect, a monolect. But God could also speak it? If I could invent a new language, would its emptiness be filled with God? Each language nestles around its own particular void, dissembles its own emptiness. The saint's imagery of crown, lily, sword, fetters, lamp. It oppresses me. Why? They roll away the stage sets. The unreality is bright today. Do I exist today? Anyway, I am not an authentic existent. Why does the brightness, your brightness, scare away the vampires?
It's kind of funny also. It's great. It's so beautiful. And, as a dear friend said to me, he says the older he gets, the stupider of a reader he is. That is, he doesn't read so much for meaning at first. He reads for pleasure and for sound washing over him, which I think is a wonderful way to read, because this is to be really experienced.
I think, Sharon, that's how all books should be read.
Yes, I really think so. This is what Pam has at the beginning of the book also, and this is how she brings so many genres and so many forms of art. The anxiety of art is a special condition, and actually is not an anxiety at all, though it has all the aspects of one. It comes about when art becomes separate from what we know, when it speaks with its own emotion. And that's Morton Feldman, The Anxiety of Art. I'm just going to start playing some of the Morton Feldman, and just come in for a couple of minutes and start and read some of Pam's words, if you would.
Sure, and I'll try to...
I'll cue you in. It's going to start right now.
Okay.
There it goes.
If to light, to pattern, break, refract, what's needed, iterate the ivory, blanc, direct, to wait is, angled black, as, hair, to thread, set, intersection, set of, 3, in fourth, the time, how signs, to this. What is Alien. Place. Ooh. Long. Lonk. Or. Two-stroke. Soft. Deuce. To fading. Once. Attack. Maze. Diffract. Inked. Reflect. When light this. As translucence. Light in. Silence. Truth schematic. Or is slant, is sight, is slit.
Well, I think that was quite beautiful.
Thank you. You know, Pam is an incredible performer, and it's difficult. I know the lines, the poem here is punctured by lines which are intended to, I don't know, not symbolize, but help us breathe.
Yeah, and it worked beautifully with the Feldman, and you did it really well.
Thank you. I tried to do them justice.
The second part of the book is much more fragmented than the first, with all this space. So you really captured that, and I could tell her the way Morton, she has sort of absorbed Morton into her way of working, which is great. The piece by Morton Feldman that she talks about is The Viola in My Life, and you said that the cover has a viola in it. That was Morton Feldman's concept.
Yeah, it's the cover of I'm Writing You From Afar is sort of a play or somewhat of an imitation on Feldman's score, The Viola in My Life. So it's very minimal, but also geometric and sharp, too, and I think that's a big part of Pam's book as well.
And she plays with the viola in my life. She says, the violet dans ma vie, and then le violon in her life, the violet in her life. So it's really great. So you are a poet in your own right. Aside from we will talk about publishing in your Black Sunlit in a few moments, but you have a new book coming up in 2022 called The Animal of Existence, which is an intense title.
Thank you.
It's a great title.
Thank you.
Would you read Yearns, a poem from the collection?
Yes. Lullaby chimes for a kiss trapped in my lungs. Send respiration into atrocity language. You must pry for pauses, the suspicious instances of gone most arrivals. I have that itch again, and I smoke near the hearth, wearing my striped sweater, sucking also at a cough drop. My mind is frayed, firing menthol into my eyes to combat the combustion I feel against words. Each of my words dwindles its inheritance. In whose state am I, your summer monolith? Singed chrysalis, sighing the rune of blind monarchs into swine etiquette. The pious posture of wallow and wilt inaugurates my sprawling of narrative debt. The dehumanized is all too human, and I am a part of you, ineligible to be loved. My entrances are a revolving door. The muse enters without the mantle of her matriarchal melos. The momentum teases the simultaneous exit. My sick lips are inoculated and shocked into an audition for you. Mine is the form that crisis takes. The hearth is warm with harm and outfitted with the nearest shape of a sorrow. Imagine a throw rug decorated with the teardrops of kindling. Imagine androgynous exhaust performing ballets up the chimney. Imagine the concierge counting the revolutions of your undying denouement. What is the plot of the Inferno ceremony? Who is there to worship now that you've bled out from Pig Cupid's arrow? Imagine an encounter that goes unreported by language.
That was Jared Daniel Fagen reading his poem Yearns from his forthcoming collection, The Animal of Existence. Am I right in saying that's a prose poem? Sonically, it's wonderful. Singed chrysalis sighing the rune of blind monarchs into swine etiquette. And if you just listen to that, there's so much internal rhyme and beautiful assonance, and it's lovely. And also the androgynous exhaust performing ballets up the chimney. It's filled with things like that. And but yet, you talk about to combat the combustion I feel against words, and imagine an encounter that goes unreported by language. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I'm just sort of fascinated with the prose poem. And, genres are traditionally experienced, right? Or that experience is already sort of available to us, right? We read prose, we read, a newspaper, a novel, whatever it may be. We read a poem, we're looking for specific devices or tropes. Mm-hmm. And these genres are always sort of categorized by their use, right, of speech or language. Mm. And so I wanted to get away from this sort of produced experience of the text, right, that's been preconditioned since, people were writing on caves, maybe. And here I was more interested in the disuse of language, its poverty. And so it's all, for me, about surface and appearance, but also depth, and sort of throwing off, right, what it is we might invest in, a poem, free verse, a plan, an ode, an elegy, whatever. I'm sort of trying to be as subversive as I can be with language and form.
But yet the beauty of the language is there. And that's something, is that a part? That's a thing apart, in a way.
Yeah, going back to your friend Sharon, who reads for pleasure, and you, I think, very kindly call attention to the assonance and the sonic associations. This is all really important to me. If I'm writing prose and I'm not telling a story, right, what else is there? And so, when people write novels, I don't know, maybe most people, maybe no people, I always see novelists who have their desk in their room and they have their entire book planned out, tacked to the walls, and they're collaging and doing all these things, which is great, but I think I'm becoming more interested in spontaneity and not having control, right? And when we were talking about Pam earlier, the impossibility or possibility to continue language in existence, to name something is precisely to control it, right? And that's sort of, I'd rather lose control,
And it has a beautiful movement to it. Movement is important, and that sort of, you have to relinquish some control in order to move. And language has its linearity, or has its downside and its confinement.
Yeah.
So
that's a big part of it for me. The frame, the containing frame of prose, right? Again, I'm interested in depth. What's within the frame? But at the same time, the poetry of, a poem in prose is always meeting that frame, right? It's encountering that limit. And that's precisely what I think for me gives it its energy. I don't know.
It's meeting at the edge.
Right.
The edge has a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to a psychologist who talks about fractals and the energy in the in between the fractals, the edges of them, and they're in the mind too. I don't really understand quite what you're saying, but I got the gist of it. The energy at the edge is very important, and you bring that same energy to what you choose to publish. Could you talk about how you started the literary press, Black Sun Lit? A little bit about the title.
Mm-hmm. So I think, like all things worth doing, Black Sun began as a way to sort of, I think, fill a gap or what I thought was a need, something that was lacking. Mm-hmm. And I had started Black Sun a very long time ago with a friend of mine who's also a poet, and we conceived this idea of articulating or curating a catalog or sort of a coterie of writers with shared sensibilities which evolve around this idea of beauty, aesthetics, and not necessarily guided by, commercial interests, right? Because who makes money doing anything?
Exactly.
So, yeah, there's that part of it, and, the meaning of the name sort of changes, I think. The two of us had ideas, and those ideas, I think, as I keep doing this, continue to evolve, right? And I think you mentioned Apollinaire, and I had never thought about that, and I was wondering if you were thinking, are you thinking about Zone, the poem Zone?
You had told me when we first met.
Oh, did I?
A while ago that was the origin. But I think that's probably what you meant. Yes.
Well, yeah, no, it's probably very likely that I said that to you when we first met. There's the decapitated sun, right? Or what is it? The Soleil Coupé, which has been translated by so many amazing writers into different things. So maybe that's part of it. Also, of course, the original Black Sun Press by Harry Crosby.
Okay.
Baudelaire's Black Sun, where he discusses beauty as not desire or something that inspires life, but rather, a wish. I'm quoting, a wish to die slowly, and this is in his poem, The Desire to Paint. And as you mentioned earlier, alchemy too is, I think, part of it. The alchemical process of turning something base, like coal or lead, into something beautiful. So that's about, in a very symbolist and surrealist and psychological, maybe, bachelardian sense, exteriorizing the mental anguish and turning it into something beautiful.
It reminds me of Pam's writing too, where she talks about the shadows and the light, and again at the edge. These things are at the edge, and the sort of, I get the visual of an eclipse with the light at the edge again.
And that's where I think Apollinaire's decapitated sun is. Maybe that's where it comes from, right? The sun which is setting or rising, and the horizon sort of, I don't know, takes its head off.
Oh.
Yeah.
Also, you have a journal that you've been doing since the beginning, I believe, called Vestiges. And you have, as part of the title, Lacune. Now, could you describe that, please? It's very fitting about what it is you do and try to publish.
Yeah, the Lacune is also somewhat mixed with the biological and I think the emotional. And again, I think I'm always thinking about mixtures and the combinatory and bringing things together that maybe shouldn't be. But when I think of lacune, or the gap, I'm thinking of both an opening right, but also an emptiness. Again, it's always sort of about filling that gap, or at least excavating something, and things get buried all the time, even after they've been dug up. So, the vestiges, the traces of things that remain. And that comes from Donald Barthelme.
Okay. Why don't you read another one of your poems, perhaps from the book or whatever you'd like, Jared?
Sure. I'll read an older prose poem. This has been on my mind because I've been having some lately really invigorating discussions with a sort of hero and mentor of mine, and she loves this poem, so I'm going to read it. It's called On a Thornbed of Neon, and was written mostly while in transit, walking or on the train, so a lot of this has to do with the interims and spontaneity and in-betweenness. I dreamt upon a thornbed of neon, a striptease of tremble-frayed fluorescence. The world was not all so beautiful that sleep mattered. What only seemed possible was comatose. My fingertips lavish the starry night of my palm, purling into beads. Briar print hums, honeycomb laurel, a hive vulgar effulgence. I lose a letter against burning noontides. Dusk escapes my chandeliers. On a thornbed of neon, I dreamt devastated odes. I dreamt only that resumed the luminous fiber of condensation consonant windows. I dreamt, rather I lied, a rose of tried grasps and needs. I lied punctured epileptic sign, a beggar of withered bouquets and crowns, an invitation, open, trying mites that fail, a triumph of my metaphysic. On a thornbed of neon, I lied, slant asleep. Light and I breathed us in, to each's trepidation. A glow is crimson. I think of all those perhapses, that I will stop breathing. I rise barbed to stamp my signature. I lied awake, a light bulb, absently. The world is beautiful, after all.
That's Jared Daniel Fagen reading his poem, On a Thornbed of Neon. And you end with, the world is beautiful, after all. And there's, after all of this devastation, I like that so much.
Thank you.
On a thornbed of neon, it's visual. I see the thorns as lit.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very almost cinematic image with the withered bouquets and crowns and the crown of thorns. I see it glowing.
Mm.
And one of my favorite lines is, dusk escapes my chandeliers. At first it seems sort of a surrealistic phrase, but then it's so specific that the chandelier is lighted, but dusk escapes. It's just, it has so much movement and interest to it.
Wow, thank you.
And when did you write this poem?
I'm not sure exactly. I want to say, I started writing more brevidously prose poems, maybe properly, a few years ago. And it was really all about my surroundings, my time, what I had time to do. Mm-hmm. And so, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this writing was between things, which is why it's so short. So I want to say maybe that all started when I started graduate school, which was 2016 or so.
Now, I was going to ask you how you balance your life as a poet, publisher, teacher, husband, person.
Wow. I don't know. I don't know if I do. It's very difficult.
Especially now. I mean, with the pandemic sort of winding down, but it's quite traumatic anyway.
Yeah. And I'm such a sort of creature. I find comfort in doing the same thing over and over again every day, forever. And I love libraries, and I haven't been able to go to them. And I haven't, for my doctorate, I've finished my coursework over a year ago, and so I'm not going to the classroom the same day every week. So that's been challenging as well. But
do you have more time for your writing now, or?
I'm not sure about more time. I think it's about shuffling the time, and priorities shift, right?
Well, we are, believe it or not, running out of time, and
Yes.
I want to just say, if you want to hear more about Jared Daniel Fagen's work and Black Sun Lit, you can go to blacksunlit.com or jareddanielfagen.com. Or is that your?
Yeah, that's
your website.
Something like that. Yeah.
And the Black Sun Lit website is absolutely beautiful. I encourage everybody to visit. And thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a great pleasure. Beautiful work, and best of luck.
Thank you,
Hope
Sharon.
to see you back.
Thank you.
Thank you.